Everyone avoided a horse because they called it cursed. A young woman, determined to discover why, decides to save the horse. What she discovers leaves everyone speechless. The horse was much more than a simple animal. Before hearing this emotional story, remember to subscribe to the channel. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Sarah woke up with a start. A disturbing dream had left her restless, but the details were already fading from her mind. Rubbing her eyes, the 23-year-old looked out the window of her modest room, observing the cobblestone streets of the small town of Shadow Valley beginning to come to life. Sarah had always been different from the other residents. While most avoided any topic related to the supernatural, she felt inexplicably drawn to the mysteries that hung over the town. Perhaps that's why, on that morning, something compelled her to go out earlier than usual. She dressed quickly, putting on a pair of faded jeans and a simple t-shirt. Her long brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail. As she left the house, Sarah felt the cool morning air caress her face, bringing with it a premonition that this day would be different. Walking through the narrow streets, she noticed the suspicious glances of the few residents who were already up. Shadow Valley was known for its secrets and superstitions, and Sarah, with her uncontrollable curiosity, was seen as a threat to the artificial tranquility that everyone strived to maintain. Her steps led her beyond the town limits, towards an area that few dared to explore. It was then that she heard a distant sound that made her heart race, the anguished neigh of a horse. Without hesitation, Sarah ran towards the sound. As she approached, the scene unfolded. An old abandoned barn with rotten boards and a partially collapsed roof. The smell of mold and abandonment was suffocating. Standing before the barn entrance, Sarah hesitated for a moment. The stories her grandmother told about the cursed horse echoed in her mind. They said it was a mysterious animal, avoided by everyone in town, although no one knew exactly why. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her courage and pushed open the rusty door. The interior of the barn was shrouded in gloom, with beams of light penetrating through the cracks in the roof. In the farthest corner, tied up with thick, worn ropes, was a horse with a coat as black as night. Its eyes, a deep amber, fixed on Sarah with a mixture of fear and plea. "My God," whispered Sarah, slowly approaching. The animal backed away, its ears flat against its head in a sign of distrust. It was then that she noticed the marks on the horse's body. Old scars and recent wounds covered its skin, telling a silent story of abuse and neglect. With a broken heart, Sarah began to speak softly. "It's okay, boy. I won't hurt you." She extended her hand, letting the horse familiarize itself with her scent. Gradually, the animal relaxed, allowing her to come closer. Examining the ropes, Sarah realized that they were tied in a way to deliberately hurt the horse. Who would do this, she thought, feeling a mixture of anger and compassion. Carefully, she began to undo the knots, murmuring reassuring words to the animal. When the last rope fell, the horse didn't run away as she expected. Instead, it took a hesitant step towards her as if seeking comfort. Sarah then noticed something strange. A small metallic object shining under the animal's skin, near its mane. Before she could examine it more closely, she heard voices approaching the barn. They were male voices, harsh and threatening. The horse became agitated, fear evident in its eyes. "We have to get out of here," whispered Sarah, her heart racing. Without thinking twice, she mounted the horse, grabbing onto its mane. "Trust me," she murmured in the animal's ear. As if understanding, the horse bolted out of the barn. Sarah ducked low, feeling the wind cut across her face as they galloped through the forest surrounding Shadow Valley. Behind them, shouts of anger and the sound of engines indicated they were being pursued. The horse ran as if its life depended on it, and Sarah realized it probably did. They zigzagged between trees, jumped over fallen logs, and crossed streams. The young woman could barely orient herself, trusting entirely in the animal's instinct. After what seemed like an eternity, the sounds of pursuit were left behind. The horse slowed its pace, entering a hidden clearing. Sarah dismounted with trembling legs, still processing what had happened. Looking at the animal beside her, she saw not only fear, but also gratitude in its eyes. "You're safe now," she said, gently stroking its neck. The horse whinnied softly, as if responding. Sarah knew she couldn't go back home, at least not for now. Whoever was after the horse would certainly look for her there. She looked around, trying to get her bearings. The forest was dense and unfamiliar, but strangely she didn't feel lost. "Looks like it's just us two now," she said to the horse. "I don't know what you've been through, but I promise I'll protect you." The animal stared at her, and for a moment Sarah felt a deep connection, as if it understood every word. She noticed again the metallic object under the horse's skin and moved closer to examine it better. It was small, about the size of a grain of rice, but clearly not natural. "What did they do to you?" she murmured, feeling a mixture of curiosity and concern. Something told her that this small object was the key to a much larger mystery. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. Sarah knew they needed to find shelter for the night. "Come on, friend," she said, gently holding the horse's mane. "We need to move." Together, they ventured deeper into the forest. Sarah had no idea what awaited them, but she was certain of one thing. Her life had changed forever that day. The horse that everyone called cursed was now her companion, and together they would face the secrets and dangers that lay ahead. Night fell quickly over the forest, enveloping Sarah and the horse in a cloak of darkness. The air grew increasingly cold, and heavy clouds gathered in the sky, heralding a storm. Sarah knew they needed to find shelter as soon as possible. "Come on, boy," she murmured, guiding the horse between the trees. "We need to protect ourselves from the rain." As if understanding the urgency of the situation, the animal quickened its pace, its ears alert to every sound in the forest. Sarah couldn't help but admire the intelligence and loyalty the horse demonstrated, especially considering what it must have been through. After what seemed like an eternity of walking in the twilight, Sarah spotted a structure ahead. It was an old cabin, partially covered by vines and moss. It seemed abandoned for years, but it was still standing and offered the protection they needed. "There!" exclaimed Sarah, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. She knew that entering an unknown structure in the forest could be dangerous, but the alternative of staying exposed to the storm was even worse. As they approached the cabin, the horse whinnied softly, as if expressing discomfort. Sarah stroked its neck, trying to calm it. "I know, friend, I don't like this much either, but it's our best option now." Carefully, she pushed the aged door, which opened with an ominous creak. The interior of the cabin was dusty and full of cobwebs, but it seemed dry and relatively safe. Sarah guided the horse inside, grateful that there was enough space for both. They had barely entered when the first raindrops began to fall, soon turning into a downpour. Lightning illuminated the sky, followed by deafening thunder that made the cabin tremble. The horse became agitated, neighing in fear. Sarah approached it, speaking in a low and soft voice. "Shh, it's okay. We're safe here." She continued stroking the animal, feeling its tense muscles gradually relax under her touch. While the storm raged outside, Sarah took the opportunity to examine her new companion more closely. In the light of the lightning, she could see better the scars that marked its body. Some seemed old, others more recent. Her heart ached imagining the suffering it must have endured. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, gently tracing one of the scars. The horse turned its head towards her, its amber eyes shining in the darkness with an intensity that surprised her. For a moment, Sarah had the strange sensation that the animal was trying to tell her something. Her gaze was drawn again to the small metallic object under the horse's skin. Now that she was closer, she could see that it wasn't simply an identification chip. It seemed to be something more complex, perhaps some type of electronic device. "What is this?" she murmured to herself, frowning. The presence of that object only increased the mystery surrounding the animal. Why would someone implant such a sophisticated device in a horse? And what relation did this have to the stories about it being cursed? A particularly strong thunderclap made Sarah jump, bringing her back to the present. She realized she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The day had been a roller coaster of events, and now that the adrenaline was wearing off, fatigue hit her with full force. Looking around the cabin, Sarah saw an old, dusty mattress in a corner. It wasn't ideal, but it would do for the night. She dragged it close to the horse, not wanting to be far from the animal. "I guess we'll have to share the room tonight," she said with a tired smile. The horse snorted softly, as if agreeing. Sarah lay down on the mattress, wrapping herself in her jacket to protect against the cold. The sound of rain on the roof was comforting, and the presence of the horse by her side gave her a strange sense of security. As she fought against sleep, her mind wandered over the day's events. Who were those men at the barn? Why were they keeping the horse captive? And what did that device implanted in it mean? Her eyelids were heavy, but before falling asleep, Sarah made a silent promise to the animal beside her. "I'm going to find out what happened to you," she murmured, "and I'll do whatever I can to protect you." The horse whinnied softly, as if it understood and appreciated. It was the last sound Sarah heard before falling into a deep and restless sleep. In her dreams, confusing images mingled. She saw the horse running free through verdant fields, but soon the scene changed to somber laboratories where hooded figures conducted sinister experiments. Voices whispered about ancient secrets and hidden powers, while the symbol of a crescent moon hovered over everything. Sarah woke up startled in the middle of the night, her heart racing. The storm had passed, leaving only the sound of light rain outside. The horse was standing beside her, looking at her with what seemed to be concern. "It was just a nightmare," she said, more to herself than to the animal. But something in the back of her mind told her that these dreams weren't just a product of her imagination. Somehow she knew they were connected to the mystery surrounding the horse. Sitting up on the mattress, Sarah observed the animal in the faint moonlight that penetrated through the cracks in the cabin. There was something about it, an almost magical presence that went beyond its physical appearance. It was as if it carried an ancient secret, something that went far beyond the stories of curses that circulated in Shadow Valley. "Who are you really?" she asked in a low voice, knowing she wouldn't get an answer, at least not in words. The horse approached, gently resting its muzzle on her shoulder. The gesture was so gentle, so full of trust, that Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Whatever the mystery behind this animal, she knew that her fate was now irrevocably linked to its. With that certainty in her heart, Sarah lay back down, allowing the sound of the rain to lull her back to sleep. Tomorrow would be a new day, and with it would come new challenges. But for now, in that isolated cabin in the middle of the forest, she and the horse had found a moment of peace. The hours passed slowly, night giving way to dawn. The first rays of sunlight began to penetrate through the cracks in the cabin, illuminating the interior with a golden light. Sarah stretched, feeling her muscles sore from sleeping on the hard mattress. As she opened her eyes, she saw the horse standing near the window, attentively observing the exterior. There was a new energy in the animal, as if it knew it was time to move on. "Good morning, friend," said Sarah, getting up and approaching it. "Ready to face a new day?" The horse whinnied softly, turning to her. Its amber eyes seemed to shine with a determination that Sarah hadn't noticed before. It was as if, during the night, a silent decision had been made between them. Sarah opened the cabin door, letting in the fresh morning air. The forest was alive with birdsong and rustling leaves. The smell of wet earth and fresh vegetation filled the air, bringing a sense of renewal. "We can't go back to Shadow Valley," Sarah said, more to herself than to the horse. "At least not yet. We need to find out more about you and about who's after us." She looked to the horizon, where the rising sun painted the sky with shades of pink and orange. A new day was beginning, bringing with it the promise of adventures and discoveries. "Let's go," Sarah said, turning to the horse with a determined smile. "We have a mystery to solve." Together, Sarah and the horse entered the passage, ready to face whatever awaited them in the heart of the Moon Temple. The true test had only just begun, but now Sarah knew she was prepared to face it. The shimmering tunnel seemed to stretch indefinitely, winding through the bowels of the mountain. Sarah and the horse advanced cautiously, their steps echoing softly off the crystal walls. As they progressed, Sarah felt a growing energy pulsing through the medallion on her neck, as if they were approaching something powerful and ancient. After what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a vast, circular chamber. The domed ceiling was so high it was lost in darkness, and in the center of the room was a circle of stones, similar to the one Sarah had encountered in the forest, but much larger and more elaborate. "It's incredible," whispered Sarah, her voice reverberating through the space. The horse whinnied softly in agreement, its amber eyes shining with recognition. Around the chamber, ancient tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes from the history of the horse and its guardians. Sarah approached one of them, fascinated by the images woven with threads that seemed to glow with their own light. "Look," she said to the horse, pointing to a particular scene. "It's you, and all the guardians who came before me." The tapestry showed the horse in various eras, always accompanied by a human figure. Sarah recognized Aunt Rose in one of the more recent scenes, and was surprised to see that the last image showed herself, still nebulous and unfinished, as if her destiny was still being woven. As she examined the tapestries, the medallion on her neck began to pulse more intensely. Sarah turned, feeling drawn to the center of the room. The circle of stones began to glow softly, responding to her presence and that of the horse. "I think we should enter the circle," said Sarah, her voice mixed with expectation and apprehension. The horse nodded, and together they stepped into the ring of ancient stones. The moment they entered, an intense light erupted from the floor, enveloping them in a pillar of pure energy. Sarah felt as if she were floating, her body light as a feather. Images began to flow in her mind, not just memories of hers or the horse's, but visions of a distant past and an uncertain future. She saw the creation of the horse, born from the union between the physical world and the ethereal realm. She saw the first battles against the forces of shadows, the formation of the Shadow Hunters as a corrupt organization that sought to control the horse's power for their own ends. The visions advanced through the centuries, showing guardians who came before her, their triumphs, their failures, their sacrifices. Sarah felt the weight of her heritage, but also the strength that came from it. Then, the images changed, showing the present and a possible future. She saw Shadow Valley and other cities around the world, slowly being consumed by an insidious darkness. She saw the Shadow Hunters growing in power, using advanced technology to try to control and corrupt the ancient magic. "That's why they implanted that device in you," Sarah said to the horse, finally understanding. "They're trying to mix technology with ancient magic to control your power." The horse neighed in confirmation, its eyes full of concern. The visions continued, showing Sarah what could happen if they failed. A world plunged into darkness, where magic was perverted and used to oppress instead of heal. But then she saw another possibility, herself and the horse, united in purpose and power, facing the darkness. She saw herself leading not just as a solitary guardian, but as part of a united community, each person contributing their own light to drive away the shadows. When the visions finally ceased, Sarah found herself on her knees in the center of the circle, panting and trembling. The horse was by her side, its presence firm and comforting. "Now I understand," she said, her voice full of renewed determination. "It's not just about you and me. It's about uniting people, showing them that everyone has a role to play in maintaining the balance." At that moment, an ethereal voice filled the chamber. "You have learned well, young guardian." A luminous figure materialized before them, not Aunt Rose this time, but an entity that seemed as ancient as the temple itself. "I am the spirit of the Moon Temple," said the figure. "For millennia, I have guarded the secrets of the horse and guided the guardians on their journey. You, Sarah, are the guardian of this era, and upon your shoulders rests a great challenge." Sarah stood up, facing the spirit with a mixture of respect and determination. "What must I do?" The spirit smiled gently. "The power to face the darkness has always been within you and the horse, but now you must learn to channel it, to unite it with the strength of all those who believe in the light." With a gesture, the spirit conjured a sphere of pure energy. "This is the heart of the moon, the source of the horse's power. With it you can amplify the magic of healing and protection, and create a shield against the forces of shadows." Sarah extended her hands, receiving the shimmering sphere. The moment she touched it, she felt a deep connection not just with the horse but with the entire network of energy that permeated the world. "But remember," warned the spirit, "the true power is not in the heart of the moon itself, but in the union between you, the horse, and all those who choose to stand on the side of light. The Shadow Hunters are strong because they feed on fear and division. Your task is to unite people, to show them that together they can resist the darkness." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight and importance of her mission. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. The spirit nodded approvingly. "Then go forth, Sarah. Return to Shadow Valley. for it is there that your true journey begins. Remember, the balance of the world depends on your actions." As the spirit's form began to fade, Sarah turned to the horse, her eyes filled with determination. "We have a long road ahead of us, friend. Are you ready?" The horse neighed powerfully, its eyes shining with an otherworldly light. Sarah felt a surge of energy through the medallion, a wordless communication of trust and readiness. Together they made their way back through the crystal tunnel, the heart of the moon safely tucked away in Sarah's backpack. As they emerged from the mountain, Sarah was surprised to see that night had fallen. The moon hung low in the sky, a brilliant crescent that seemed to light their path. "We need to move quickly," Sarah said, mounting the horse. "The shadow hunters won't give up easily." As if in response to her words, a distant sound echoed through the forest, the roar of engines and angry shouts. The pursuers had found their trail. "Let's go," Sarah urged, and the horse took off at a gallop. They raced through the moonlit forest, branches whipping past them as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Sarah could feel the power of the heart of the moon pulsing in her backpack, its energy seeming to give both her and the horse renewed strength. As they rode, Sarah's mind raced with plans and possibilities. She knew that returning to Shadow Valley wouldn't be easy. The town had lived under the influence of fear and superstition for so long that convincing people to unite against the darkness would be a challenge. But she also remembered the visions she had seen in the temple, the potential for light and hope if people could come together. She thought of her grandmother, of the friends she had left behind, of all the people in Shadow Valley who deserved a chance at a life free from fear. The sound of pursuit grew closer, and Sarah realized they couldn't outrun their enemies forever. They needed a plan. "We need to find a place to make a stand," she said to the horse. "Somewhere we can use the power of the heart of the moon to our advantage." As if in answer to her words, the forest ahead began to thin out, revealing a familiar landscape. They were approaching the outskirts of Shadow Valley. Sarah's heart raced as she recognized the old town square in the distance, its central fountain glimmering in the moonlight. It was a place of gathering, of community, the perfect spot to make their stand. "There," she said, pointing. "That's where we'll face them." As they galloped into the town square, Sarah could see lights coming on in the surrounding houses. People were waking up, drawn by the commotion. Sarah dismounted, standing tall beside the horse in the center of the square. She took out the heart of the moon, feeling its warmth in her hands. "People of Shadow Valley," she called out, her voice ringing clear in the night air. "I know you're afraid. I know you've been told to fear the unknown, to hide from the mysteries that surround us. But tonight I'm asking you to be brave, to stand with us against a darkness that threatens not just our town, but the whole world." Faces began to appear in windows and doorways, curious and frightened. Sarah recognized some of them, neighbors, old school friends, people she had known all her life. "The horse you've been told is cursed is actually a protector, a being of ancient magic, meant to keep the balance between light and shadow," Sarah continued. "And now, we need your help to fulfill that purpose." The roar of engines grew louder. The shadow hunters were almost upon them. "I know it's a lot to take in," Sarah said, her voice softening, "but look into your hearts. You know there's truth in what I'm saying. You've felt the growing darkness, the fear that's been slowly consuming our town. Tonight we have a chance to change that, to stand together and show that the light within us is stronger than any shadow." As she spoke, the heart of the moon began to glow brighter in her hands. Its light spread out, touching each person in the square, and Sarah could see the change in their eyes as understanding and courage began to replace fear. One by one, people began to step forward. Old Mrs. Johnson from the bakery, Tom, the postman, Sarah's old teacher, Mr. Richards, even the town sheriff, who had always been skeptical of anything out of the ordinary. "We're with you, Sarah," the sheriff said, his voice gruff but determined. "What do you need us to do?" Sarah felt a surge of hope and gratitude. "Form a circle," she instructed. "Join hands. Focus on the light within you, on your love for this town and each other. Let it grow, let it shine." As the townspeople formed a circle around Sarah and the horse, the first of the shadow hunters' vehicles burst into the square. Dark-clad figures leaped out, their faces hidden behind masks, weapons at the ready. "Give us the horse and the heart of the moon," one of them demanded, his voice distorted and cold. You can't hope to stand against us." Sarah stood her ground, the horse beside her, the heart of the moon glowing brilliantly in her hands. "You're wrong," she said. "We're not alone and we're not afraid anymore." With those words she raised the heart of the moon high. Its light exploded outward, connecting with the circle of townspeople. Each person began to glow with an inner light, their joined hands forming a barrier of pure energy. The shadow hunters charged forward, but they couldn't breach the circle. Their weapons sparked and fizzled against the barrier of light. Sarah felt the power flowing through her, through the horse, through every person in the circle. She understood now what the spirit of the Moon Temple had meant. The true power wasn't in any object or individual. It was in the unity of people standing together against the darkness. As the light grew brighter, the shadow hunters began to retreat. Their masks cracked and fell away, revealing faces twisted by fear and hatred. But as the light touched them, Sarah saw something change in their eyes too. Confusion replaced anger, and then understanding. One by one, the shadow hunters dropped their weapons. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the power of the light. Others simply turned and fled, unable to face the truth of what they had become. As the last of the shadow hunters disappeared into the night, the light began to fade. But its warmth remained, filling the town square with a sense of peace and unity that Sarah had never felt before. She turned to the townspeople, tears of joy and relief in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "All of you. You've saved not just our town, but perhaps the world." The horse neighed softly, nuzzling Sarah's shoulder. She stroked its mane, feeling the bond between them stronger than ever. "What happens now?" someone in the crowd asked. Sarah smiled, looking out at the faces of her friends and neighbors. "Now we rebuild, we heal. We remember the strength we found tonight, and we use it to make our town, our world, a better place." She held up the heart of the moon, its glow now soft and steady. "This power, this light, it's not just in this artifact, it's in all of us. And as long as we remember that, as long as we stand together, the darkness will never win." As the sun began to rise over Shadow Valley, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But she was ready. With the horse by her side, the heart of the moon to guide them, and the people of Shadow Valley standing with them, she knew that they could face whatever came next. The curse was broken, the shadows dispelled. And in their place, a new dawn of hope and unity had begun. As the days passed, Shadow Valley began to transform. The once secretive and fearful town was now bustling with a new energy. People walked the streets with their heads held high, greeting each other warmly. The air of suspicion that had hung over the town for so long was replaced by a sense of community and purpose. Sarah found herself at the center of this transformation. With the horse by her side, and the heart of the moon safely stored in a specially crafted container, she became a beacon of hope for the townspeople. Every day people would come to her with questions, seeking guidance or simply wanting to be near the miraculous duo that had changed their lives. One sunny morning, as Sarah was helping to repair the old town hall, a project that had become a symbol of the town's renewal, she noticed a group of children gathered around the horse. The animal, once feared and avoided, was now a favorite among the younger residents of Shadow Valley. "Miss Sarah," called out a little girl named Emily, "can you tell us the story again, about how you and the horse saved the town?" Sarah smiled, putting down her tools and walking over to the group. The horse nickered softly, gently nuzzling Emily's hair. "Well," Sarah began, sitting down on a nearby bench, "it all started on a day much like this one." As she recounted the tale, Sarah marveled at how much had changed. The story, which had once seemed like a fantastic dream, was now a cherished part of Shadow Valley's history. But even as she spoke of their victory, Sarah knew that their work was far from over. The defeat of the Shadow Hunters in Shadow Valley had been a significant blow to the organization. But Sarah knew they were still out there. Reports had been coming in from other towns and cities of strange occurrences and unexplained shadows. The battle they had won was just the beginning of a larger war. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Sarah made her way to her grandmother's house. The old woman had become a key ally in their ongoing efforts to understand and combat the forces of darkness. "Come in, dear," Grandma Betty called as Sarah knocked on the door. "I've just made some tea." Sarah entered the cozy living room, breathing in the familiar scent of herbs and old books. Her grandmother was seated in her favorite armchair, a large tome open on her lap. "Any news?" Sarah asked, accepting a cup of steaming tea. Grandma Betty's face grew serious. "I'm afraid so. I've been corresponding with some old friends in Maplewood, about 100 miles from here. They say the shadows are growing deeper there. People are going missing." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, despite the warm tea in her hands. "The shadow hunters?" "It seems likely," Grandma Betty nodded. "They're regrouping, gathering strength. I fear they may be planning something big." Sarah set down her cup, her mind racing. "We need to do something. We can't let what almost happened here happen to other towns." "I agree," her grandmother said, closing the book on her lap. "But Sarah, you must be careful. The shadow hunters will be looking for revenge. They'll be better prepared next time." Sarah stood up, walking to the window. Outside, she could see the horse grazing peacefully in the backyard. Its coat shimmered in the fading sunlight, the crescent moon mark on its forehead glowing softly. "We'll be ready too," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "We're stronger now. We know what we're up against. And we're not alone anymore." Grandma Betty smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's my girl. Now let me show you something I've found. It might help us understand more about the heart of the moon and its connection to the horse." As her grandmother began to explain her latest discoveries, Sarah felt a familiar excitement building within her. Every piece of information they uncovered was another step towards fully understanding their power and responsibility. The next morning, Sarah called a town meeting. The community gathered in the newly repaired town hall, the atmosphere buzzing with anticipation. Sarah stood at the podium, the horse standing faithfully by her side. "Friends," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "we've come a long way in a short time. Our town has become a beacon of hope, an example of what can happen when people come together and face their fears. But our work isn't done." She went on to explain about the reports from Maplewood and other towns. The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. "The shadow hunters are still out there," Sarah continued. "They're regrouping, growing stronger, and they're targeting other communities that don't have the knowledge or resources to defend themselves. We can't stand by and let that happen." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her fellow townspeople. They had come so far from the fearful, isolated community they once were. "I propose we form a group. Let's call it the Lightbringers. Our mission will be to travel to these threatened towns to teach them what we've learned, to help them find the light within themselves, just as we did here in Shadow Valley." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Hands shot up all around the room as people volunteered to join the Lightbringers. Sarah saw determination in their eyes, a readiness to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Over the next few weeks, Shadow Valley was a flurry of activity. The Lightbringers trained intensively, learning to channel their inner light, to work as a team, to recognize and combat the tactics of the shadow hunters. Sarah and the horse were at the center of it all, guiding, teaching, inspiring. Finally, the day came for the first mission. A team of Lightbringers, led by Sarah and the horse, prepared to set out for Maplewood. The entire town gathered to see them off, offering words of encouragement and support. As Sarah mounted the horse, the heart of the moon secure in her backpack, she looked out at the faces of her friends and neighbors. She saw hope there and trust, and a shared sense of purpose that brought tears to her eyes. "We'll be back soon," she promised, "and we'll bring the light with us." With a final wave, Sarah and the Lightbringers set off down the road, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they rode, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. From a cursed horse and a curious girl to the protectors of light and balance. It was a journey she never could have imagined. But as the horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm on the road, Sarah knew that their greatest adventures were still to come. The battle against the shadows was far from over, but with each step, with each life touched, with each community united, they were changing the world, one spark of light at a time. The journey to Maplewood was not an easy one. The Lightbringers traveled through dense forests and over rolling hills, always alert for signs of the shadow hunters. Sarah rode at the head of the group, the horse moving with a sense of purpose, as if it knew exactly where they needed to go. As they traveled, Sarah used the time to further train the Lightbringers. They practiced focusing their inner light, creating protective barriers, and sensing the presence of shadow energy. The heart of the moon, safely stored in Sarah's backpack, seemed to pulse with energy, enhancing their abilities and strengthening their resolve. On the third day of their journey, as they set up camp for the night, one of the Lightbringers, a young man named Jake, approached Sarah with a concerned look on his face. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "I've been feeling something strange. It's like a cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. It's been getting stronger as we get closer to Maplewood." Sarah nodded, her face serious. "I've felt it too. The shadows are growing stronger there. We need to be prepared for anything when we arrive." That night, as the Lightbringers slept, Sarah sat awake, keeping watch with the horse. The animal stood alert, its ears twitching at every sound in the dark forest around them. "What do you think we'll find in Maplewood, old friend?" Sarah whispered, stroking the horse's mane. The horse turned its head, its amber eyes seeming to glow in the darkness. Through their connection, Sarah felt a mixture of determination and caution. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together. As dawn broke, the Lightbringers packed up camp and continued their journey. The closer they got to Maplewood, the more oppressive the air seemed to become. The forest around them grew quieter, the birds and animals seemingly having fled the area. Finally, as the sun began to set on their fourth day of travel, they crested a hill and saw Maplewood spread out before them in the valley below. Sarah's heart sank at the sight. Even from a distance, she could see that something was terribly wrong. A dark, swirling mist hung over the town, obscuring parts of it from view. The few buildings they could see looked dilapidated and abandoned. There were no lights, no signs of life or activity. "It's worse than we thought," murmured Lisa, another of the Lightbringers. "How could it have gotten this bad so quickly?" Sarah dismounted, her eyes never leaving the shrouded town below. "The shadows feed on fear and despair," she said. "Once they take hold, they can spread quickly if left unchecked." She turned to face the group, her expression determined. "This is what we've trained for. Remember, the light within you is stronger than any shadow. We're here to remind these people of their own inner strength, to help them reclaim their town from the darkness." The Lightbringers nodded, their faces a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Sarah remounted the horse, the heart of the moon glowing faintly through her backpack. "Let's go," she said. "Maplewood needs us." As they descended into the valley, the air grew colder and the mist thicker. Sarah could feel the horse's muscles tensing beneath her, sensing the wrongness that permeated the area. The Lightbringers huddled closer together, their hands on their medallions, ready to call upon their inner light at a moment's notice. They entered the town through what must have once been a welcoming main street. Now the buildings loomed dark and empty on either side. Windows were boarded up or broken, and debris littered the street. The only sound was the clip-clop of the horse's hooves on the pavement, and the nervous breathing of the Lightbringers. "Where is everyone?" whispered Jake, his eyes darting from one abandoned storefront to another. As if in answer to his question, a figure suddenly darted across the street ahead of them. It moved in a strange, jerky manner, more shadow than substance. "There!" called out Lisa, pointing. Sarah raised her hand, signaling the group to stop. "Remember your training," she said quietly. "Don't let fear take hold, that's what the shadows want." She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself and connecting with the horse and the heart of the moon. When she opened them again, they glowed with an inner light. "Lightbringers," she called out, her voice ringing clear in the eerie silence. "It's time to bring back the light to Maplewood. Spread out and stay alert. Remember, we're here to help, not to fight. Our light is a beacon of hope, not a weapon of destruction." As the Lightbringers began to move through the town, more shadow figures appeared. They flitted between buildings, always just at the edge of vision. Some bolder ones approached closer, their forms writhing and shifting, as if unable to maintain a solid shape in the presence of the Lightbringers. Sarah guided the horse down the main street, the heart of the moon pulsing stronger with each step. She could feel the shadows recoiling from their presence, but also sensed a deeper, more malevolent force at work. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. Sarah turned to see one of the Lightbringers, a woman named Maria, being enveloped by a mass of shadow. The darkness seemed to be trying to pull her in, to consume her. Without hesitation, Sarah spurred the horse towards Maria. As they approached, Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out the heart of the moon. Its light blazed forth, cutting through the shadows like a sword. "Maria," Sarah called out, "remember your light. It's within you. Don't let the shadows deceive you." Maria's eyes, wide with terror, locked onto Sarah's. For a moment it seemed as if the shadows would overwhelm her. But then, with a cry of defiance, Maria's own inner light burst forth. The shadows surrounding her dissipated with a hiss, revealing Maria standing tall, her medallion glowing brightly. This seemed to be a turning point. All around them, the Lightbringers began to shine more brightly, their confidence growing as they realized they could indeed stand against the shadows. The dark mist that had hung over the town began to thin in places, revealing glimpses of the sky above. As the Lightbringers continued to move through the town, calling out words of encouragement and hope, something remarkable began to happen. Doors began to open. Faces, pale and frightened but undeniably human, peered out from behind boarded-up windows. "It's okay," Sarah called out to these hidden residents. "We're here to help. The shadows can't hurt you if you don't let them. Remember your own inner light." Slowly, cautiously, people began to emerge from their hiding places. They looked haggard and afraid, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes as they saw the Lightbringers standing strong against the shadows. An elderly man approached Sarah, his steps faltering but his gaze steady. "Who are you?" he asked. "How can you stand against the darkness when we couldn't?" Sarah dismounted, standing eye to eye with the man. "We're the Lightbringers," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We come from Shadow Valley, a town that was once as shrouded in darkness as yours, but we learned that the light within us is stronger than any shadow. And we're here to help you remember that too." As she spoke, more townspeople gathered around, drawn by her words and the warm glow emanating from the Lightbringers. Sarah could see the change happening in their eyes, fear giving way to hope, despair transforming into determination. "The shadows fed on your fear," Sarah continued, addressing the growing crowd. "They made you feel alone and powerless, but you're not. Each of you has a light within you, a strength that the shadows can't touch unless you let them. And when you join your lights together, there's nothing you can't overcome." As if to emphasize her words, the heart of the moon pulsed brightly. Its light spread out, touching each person in the crowd. As it did, their own inner light seemed to awaken, glowing faintly at first, then with increasing strength. The horse whinnied, rearing up on its hind legs. As it did, the crescent moon mark on its forehead blazed with light, sending a wave of energy rippling through the town. The remaining shadows seemed to shrink back, their hold on Maplewood weakening. "This is your moment," Sarah called out to the townspeople. "Reclaim your home, let your light shine." With a collective cry, the people of Maplewood seemed to shake off the last of their fear. Their inner lights blazed forth, joining with those of the Lightbringers. The combined radiance swept through the town like a tidal wave, pushing back the shadows, cleansing the streets and buildings of the dark miasma that had hung over them for so long. As the light reached the edges of town, there was a sound like a great collective sigh. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over Maplewood lifted, replaced by a feeling of freshness and renewal. The sky above cleared, revealing a tapestry of stars and a bright crescent moon. The townspeople looked around in wonder, as if seeing their home for the first time. Tears of joy and relief flowed freely as neighbors embraced, friends reunited, and families came together. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched the scene unfold. This was why they had come, not just to fight back the shadows, but to remind people of their own strength, their own capacity for light and hope. But even as she celebrated this victory, Sarah knew their work was far from over. The shadow hunters were still out there, and there were other towns that needed their help. The battle against the darkness would be a long one. As if sensing her thoughts, the horse nudged Sarah gently with its nose. She turned to look into its wise amber eyes, feeling a renewed sense of purpose flow through their connection. "You're right," she said softly, stroking its mane. "This is just the beginning, but together we can face whatever comes next." Sarah turned back to the Lightbringers, who were mingling with the townspeople, sharing stories and offering comfort. She saw in their faces the same determination she felt in her heart. They were ready for the challenges ahead. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Sarah knew that a new chapter was beginning, not just for Maplewood or Shadow Valley, but for all the towns and cities threatened by the encroaching darkness. The Lightbringers had proven that their mission was possible, that hope could be restored even in the darkest of places. Over the next few days, Sarah and the Lightbringers worked tirelessly with the people of Maplewood. They taught them techniques to maintain and strengthen their inner light, how to recognize and resist the influence of shadows, and most importantly, how to support and uplift each other. The transformation of Maplewood was remarkable. Buildings were repaired, streets were cleaned, and gardens that had withered under the shadow's influence began to bloom again. But more significant than the physical changes was the shift in the town's spirit. Where once there had been fear and isolation, now there was a sense of community and purpose. On their last evening in Maplewood, the town held a celebration in the newly restored town square. Lanterns hung from every available surface, their warm light a testament to the town's rebirth. Music filled the air and laughter could be heard from every corner. Sarah stood at the edge of the square, the horse by her side, watching the festivities with a sense of pride and accomplishment. The mayor of Maplewood, a woman named Clara who had emerged as a strong leader during the restoration efforts, approached them. "I don't know how we can ever thank you," Clara said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You've given us back our home, our hope." Sarah smiled, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "You don't need to thank us. This victory belongs to all of you. We just helped you remember the strength you always had within you." Clara nodded, her expression turning serious. "We've heard about other towns, other cities facing the same darkness we did. Now that we know how to fight it, we want to help. Some of us have decided to join your Lightbringers, if you'll have us." Sarah felt a surge of emotion at Clara's words. This was more than she had dared to hope for, not just saving towns, but inspiring them to join the fight. "We would be honored to have you with us," Sarah said. "The more lights we have shining in the darkness, the stronger we all become." As the celebration continued into the night, Sarah found a quiet moment to confer with her fellow Lightbringers. They gathered in a circle, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their medallions. "We've done good work here," Sarah began, looking at each of them in turn. "But our journey is far from over. The shadows are still out there, and they're growing stronger. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Jake, who had grown more confident since their arrival in Maplewood, spoke up. "I've been thinking about what we learned here. The shadows didn't just appear overnight. They crept in slowly, taking advantage of people's fears and doubts. Maybe we need to focus not just on fighting the shadows, but on strengthening communities before the shadows can take hold." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Sarah nodded, impressed by Jake's insight. "That's an excellent point. We need to be proactive, not just reactive. We'll incorporate that into our strategy moving forward." As they discussed plans for their next missions, Sarah felt a familiar warmth in her chest. She reached into her shirt and pulled out the heart of the moon, which was glowing softly. At the same time, the horse, which had been grazing nearby, lifted its head, the crescent mark on its forehead shimmering. Sarah closed her eyes, focusing on the connection between herself, the horse, and the heart of the moon. A vision flashed in her mind, a map of the surrounding region, with points of light representing towns and cities. Some burned bright and steady, while others flickered weakly, threatened by encroaching shadows. But there was one spot, far to the north, that pulsed with a dark energy that made Sarah's heart race. She opened her eyes, her expression grave. "Something's coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something big." The other Lightbringers leaned in, their faces a mixture of concern and determination. Sarah quickly described her vision, watching as understanding dawned in their eyes. "The Shadow Hunters," Lisa said, her voice tight with worry. "They're gathering their forces." Sarah nodded. "I think so. And I have a feeling they're not just after individual towns anymore. They're planning something much larger." A heavy silence fell over the group as they contemplated the implications of Sarah's vision. Finally, Maria spoke up, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "What do we do?" Sarah took a deep breath, looking around at her companions. These people had already shown incredible bravery and dedication. Now she was about to ask even more of them. "We prepare," she said firmly. "We gather more Lightbringers, strengthen more towns." And then, she paused, her gaze turning northward. "We take the fight to them." The gravity of her words settled over the group. They all understood what she was proposing. Not just defending against the shadows, but actively seeking out their source and confronting it head-on. One by one, the Lightbringers nodded, their faces set with determination. They had come too far, seen too much to back down now. As the meeting broke up and the Lightbringers rejoined the celebration, Sarah remained where she was, lost in thought. The horse approached, nuzzling her shoulder gently. "We've got a long road ahead of us, old friend," Sarah murmured, stroking its mane. The horse nickered softly, its amber eyes seeming to glow with an inner light of their own. Sarah looked out over the town square, watching as the people of Maplewood danced and laughed, their faces alight with joy and hope. This was what they were fighting for, she realized. Not just to push back the darkness, but to protect this light, this joy, this sense of community and belonging. As the night wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Sarah made her way to the center of the square. The townspeople gathered around her, sensing that she had something important to say. "People of Maplewood," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Tomorrow, we'll be leaving you, but we're not abandoning you. The light you've rekindled here is strong, and it will only grow stronger as long as you nurture it." She paused, looking around at the faces turned towards her. "But there are other towns out there that need help, just as you did. And there's a greater threat looming on the horizon. We're going to face it to fight for a world where no town has to live in fear of the shadows." A murmur went through the crowd. Sarah could see a mixture of emotions on their faces, gratitude, admiration, and a touch of fear at the mention of the coming threat. "Some of your neighbors have chosen to join us as Lightbringers," Sarah continued, "but even those of you who stay here have a crucial role to play. Your light, your hope, your community. These are the things that will keep the shadows at bay. Remember what you've learned. Stand together. And know that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always hope as long as we keep our inner light burning." As Sarah finished speaking, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd. People surged forward, wanting to shake her hand, to thank her, to wish her and the Lightbringers well on their journey. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth and gratitude of the people of Maplewood, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, the challenges great. But looking at the faces around her, seeing the light that shone in their eyes, she knew that it was a fight worth having. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah made her way back to the horse. She leaned against its strong flank, taking comfort in its steady presence. "Tomorrow we ride," she whispered, "towards whatever fate awaits us." The horse nickered softly, as if in agreement. Together they looked up at the night sky, where the crescent moon hung like a beacon of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The girl, the horse, and the growing army of light they had inspired. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, her mind was filled with thoughts of the journey to come. She knew that the battle against the shadow hunters would be their greatest challenge yet. But as she drifted off, her hand resting on the warmth of the heart of the moon, she felt a sense of peace. They were on the right path, and together they would find a way to bring light to even the darkest corners of the world. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was blessing their departure. The entire town of Maplewood had gathered to see the Lightbringers off, lining the main street with cheers and well-wishes. Sarah mounted the horse, the heart of the moon secure in her pack. She looked back at the group of Lightbringers, her original team from Shadow Valley, now joined by several volunteers from Maplewood. Their faces were a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but all shared a common determination. "Ready," Sarah called out. A chorus of affirmative responses rang out. With a final wave to the people of Maplewood, Sarah urged the horse forward. The Lightbringers fell in behind her, and together they set off down the road heading north towards the source of the darkness they had sensed. As they traveled, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that fateful day when she had first discovered the horse in the abandoned barn. She had gone from a curious, somewhat isolated girl to the leader of a growing movement. The weight of that responsibility was sometimes overwhelming, but Sarah found strength in the trust and support of her companions. Their journey took them through varied landscapes, dense forests, open plains, and steep mountain passes. In each place they passed, they found signs of the encroaching shadows. Sometimes it was subtle, an unexplained chill in the air, a sense of unease among the local wildlife. Other times it was more overt. Abandoned villages, fields where crops had withered and died for no apparent reason. At each stop, the Lightbringers did what they could. They cleared lingering shadows, taught locals how to recognize and resist dark influences, and always reminded people of the light within themselves. As they traveled further north, the signs of shadow influence grew stronger. The days seemed shorter, the nights longer, and filled with unsettling sounds. Sarah found herself relying more and more on the guidance of the horse and the power of the Heart of the Moon to navigate their path. One evening, as they set up camp in a particularly gloomy forest, Jake approached Sarah with a concerned look on his face. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "I've been talking with some of the others. We're worried. The shadows seem to be getting stronger the further north we go. Are you sure we're ready for whatever we're going to face?" Sarah looked at Jake, seeing the fear behind his eyes. She knew that many of the others probably shared his concerns. Taking a deep breath, she stood up, calling the group to gather around. "I know you're all feeling the weight of our mission," she began, looking around at their faces illuminated by the campfire. "The shadows are strong here, stronger than anything we've faced before. But I want you to remember something." She reached into her pack and pulled out the Heart of the Moon. Its soft glow seemed to push back the gloom of the forest. "This light, this power, it's not just in this artifact. It's in each and every one of you. We've faced shadows before and we've overcome them, not because of any magical object, but because of the strength and light within ourselves." Sarah paused, letting her words sink in. She could see the doubt in some faces starting to give way to determination. "We're not just fighting against the shadows," she continued. "We're fighting for something, for our homes, for our loved ones, for a world where people don't have to live in fear. That's a power the shadows can never understand or overcome." As she spoke, Sarah felt a familiar warmth spreading through her. The horse, which had been grazing nearby, approached, its crescent mark glowing softly. The Lightbringers' medallions began to glow in response, creating a circle of light that pushed back the darkness of the forest. "We are stronger together," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "Our light, united, can overcome any darkness. Remember that in the days to come. No matter how dark things may seem, as long as we stand together, there is always hope." A murmur of agreement ran through the group. Sarah could see renewed confidence in their eyes, a strengthening of their resolve. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and fear. But she also knew that together they had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. As the group dispersed to their tents for the night, Sarah remained by the fire, the horse standing faithfully by her side. She looked up at the sky, barely visible through the dense canopy of trees. Somewhere out there, the shadow hunters were gathering their forces, but here in this small clearing a light was burning, a light that would soon challenge the very heart of darkness itself. Sarah stroked the horse's mane, drawing comfort from its steady presence. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we continue our journey, and no matter what we face, we'll face it together." The horse nickered softly in response, its amber eyes reflecting the firelight. As Sarah prepared for sleep, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they were on the right path. The light within them would guide their way, even in the darkest of times.